fulfillment of both the Abrahamic and Davidic covenant, Jesus' lineage proves his earthly identity and support his rightful place as heirs to the throne of David, and therefore the means by which the whole world can be blessed. How can you ensure that you won't miss out? Abraham begets Isaac. Let us begin. Abraham begets Isaac. We want to be brief and to the point, and we hope that you follow along with us. You make sure that you go to the scriptures in regards to Abraham getting Isaac. Abraham received the covenant that ultimately established the people of Israel. The story of Abraham is one of faithfulness from both the patriotic and God. Genesis 12, the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 7, verses 15 and 17. It is important that you understand the lineage of Jesus Christ. Abraham is considered to be the father of faith. Okay, despite Isaac being the only son of the promise, Genesis 17, 19 through 21, Abraham was faithful in preparing to sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. God showed his faithfulness to Abraham again by sending a ram to replace Isaac on the altar, then renewing the covenant. All right. God had asked him to sacrifice his son, and he proceeds to do so. But there was a ram in the bush, and that's why I say God always has a ram in the bush. Whenever God tells you to go, you just go. God has made a way whenever he tells you to go. And Isaac begets Jacob. After Abraham's death, the covenant promise passed to Isaac. Little is said about Isaac, but his and Rebekah's parenting style of playing favored Genesis 25:28 belied his sons. Favoritism. Remember what you're doing when you're doing favoritism for your children. God can play favoritism, but there's a special anointing in that situation that don't mean any harm, but mean good. But when you start playing favoritism, all kinds of things can go awry, because that's not of God, it's of you. And Jacob begets Judas and his brethren. God meets Jacob at Bethel and promises him land and children. Genesis 28:13 through 15. Echoing promises made to Abraham. That's in Matthew, the 1st chapter. Above of Jacob's 12 sons, Judas called Judah in Genesis 49, 8 and 10th verse. Unexpectedly inherited the promise of a royal line. Matthew 1 and 6 below. He wasn't the first, second, or third born son in Genesis. Further, he was born to Leah, who was hated by her husband. All right. And Judas begets Phares and Zerah of Tamar. The rarity of women in this genealogy should draw attention to all five who are mentioned, as each was uniquely notable. Tamar, called Tamar in Genesis 38 and 6, is the first woman listed. She was widowed before bearing children for her husband. So Judas, her father-in-law, told her to wait until that man, brother, was old enough to become wed to her. But detecting a deception on the part of Judas, she tricked him into impregnating her. On learning the truth, he declared she had been more righteous than I. There's incest there. When you talk about incest and things that are going on, it does not matter. There is nothing new under the sun. All right. Let's talk about, on learning the truth, he declared she had been more righteous than I. Phares and Zerah, called Pharaohs and Zerah in Genesis, were twins. During their birth, Zerah put his hands first on thus and had a scarlet thread tied to him to mark him as firstborn. But Phares, meaning he who births forth, was actually born first. Thus his inclusion in the next verse. And Phares begat Esron. Little is known of Phares outside of his birth story, other than the fact that his house maintained a good reputation. Ruth 4 and 12. Esron, spelled Hezron, in Genesis 46:12, was born in Canaan and journeyed to Egypt with Jacob and the rest of the family. His name established a link between the beginning of the 12 tribes in Genesis and their fertility and subsequent struggle in subsequent struggle described in Exodus. And Israel begets Aaron. Aaron, spelled Ram in Ruth, was one of the children born in Egypt, part of the evidence of Israel's fruitfulness in their land. Aaron beget Abinadab, and Abinadab begets Naasson, and Naasson begets Solomon, and Solomon begets Boaz of Rahab. Stand by just for a minute. Let us turn something down here. All right, we have the telephone that is hooked into our radio station where we're broadcasting, ringing and making sounds, and we wanted to quieten that. Okay, let's go back to, and Aaron begets Abinadab, and Abinadab begets Naasson, and Naasson begets Solomon, and Solomon begets Boaz of Rachel. The male names in this segment match those of in 1 Chronicles 2, 10, and 11. Those loosely represent the period of Judas, about 1300 to 1050 BC, and therein lies a bitter problem that are not enough names in either record to cover the 330 years period of time. Instead, the names represent all that time that this drives the narrative representing by the genealogy closer to David. Note, mentioned in the genealogy in 1 Chronicle is Rahab, spelled Rahab, in Joshua 6 and 7. Second are 4 women mentioned in Matthew genealogy. She hid the Israelite spies in Jericho, thereby saving their lives. Joshua 2, 3, and 6. Remember when they were seeking out the lamb, and she was a prostitute. That means that God can use anybody. Don't get down and put down on nobody that's in the work of God's business, in the business of working for God. Because God uses whoever he pleases. Guess what? Even you, regardless of who you are, whether you're a liar, a thief, or a murderer, whatever it is, God can use you. God can use you, and he will use you if you allow him. Her inclusion here points not only to the importance of women in Jesus' lineage, but also to God's love for non-Israelites. Look at that. That's where racism comes in. God loves everybody and uses everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, whatever. So don't you, whoever you are, regardless of color, black, white, green, purple, whoever you are, when you bring racism in, you are getting out of bounds when it comes to Jesus Christ. Because God can use all of us. The way she honored God in speech and deed transcend both her deception and occupation. Joshua 2, 1 and 21. For this reason, she was welcomed without question into Israel, despite being born in an unfaithful nation. Joshua 6 and 25 and James 2:25 is telling you where she was born. Like his father, Solomon, Boaz, spelled Boaz in Ruth 4:21, was often overshadowed by the remarkable women he married. See Matthew 1 and 5. And Boaz beget Obed of Ruth, and Obed begets Jesse. Ruth is the third woman listed in the lineage. She was from Moab, a nation that Israel was to avoid or else risk being led astray. Numbers 25. Ruth represented an exception based on faithfulness. She took her mother-in-law Naomi's God and family as her own. Ruth 1 and 16. Ruth met and later married Boaz. Ruth 2 and 1 and 4:13. The son of Obed became the father of Jesse, grandfather of David. Obed, the grandfather. The father of Jesse, grandfather of David. All right, powerful information there. Remember that now. Remember that. Powerful information there. Who his grandfather was. David, grandfather, father of David. Jesus to Solomon. And Jesus begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her, and he had been the wife of Uriah. You remember that? Remember what David did? He lusted after somebody's wife, Uriah's wife, and he had him killed. Yes, David became a murderer. David again killed. Remember when he killed the Egyptian who were beating his people. And he rose up and killed him, and he fled when another of his brothers saw him. And probably was telling folks. This verse makes a transition from the period of judges to the time of the united monarch, about 1050 to 930 BC. David the king comes with many stories of faithfulness of God's example, 1 Samuel 17. However, the storyline Matthew reminds us leads about the ultimate one, God's faithfulness in the midst of human sin. Whatever God promises, regardless of what you as human beings do, God's still going to do it. And you can go through muck and mire and anything else you want to do, and God has promised He's still going to follow through on His promise. Your plans as human beings will not interfere with God's plans for you. However, the storyline Matthew reminds his readers about was ultimately one of God's faithfulness in the midst of human sin. God kept His promise even after David sinned against Uriah, spare Uriah in 2 Samuel 11, and Bathsheba. She is the fourth woman listed, but referred to only as the wife of Uriah. This is Bathsheba, the one that follows that David was lusting after, and the one who he had her husband killed in battle. This full account and its consequences are recorded in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. These are powerful things that I speak of here. And if you're not familiar with them, you need to go to those verses, 2 Samuel 11 and 12, and begin to read about it. Bathsheba's second son was Solomon. The first one died that was conceived in sin. In fact, we all conceived in sin. But the thing about this one, God did not like that, really was angry, so He took that son. And after that son had died, David got up, took off all of his sackclothes and mourning, and went on about his business, doing what he's supposed to, because God had took him. He was mourning and begging Christ to save that son, but begging God to save that son, to keep that son alive. But God did not have that. God did not want that. Bathsheba's second son was Solomon. As a result of intrigue and violence in the royal family, this son inherited the throne. 1 Kings 1 through 35. He was a wise man, example 10, 1 and 5, who nevertheless stumbled into faithfulness. That's the 11th chapter, verses 1 through 13. Now listen, Solomon, when he became king, a lot of things we asked God for, but what did he want? He asked God for wisdom, and for wisdom to rule and guide his people. That's a powerful thing, and God gave him that wisdom. In fact, Solomon was the wisest man of all time. He was quite a wise man. I remember especially drawn to the situation when two women were complaining about the birth and who was the mother of a child. When two women had in a house had born a child, and one of them had rolled over and went to sleep on her child and killed him, while the other one was still alive. So the one that had rolled over on her child and killed him went to David, and they was all complaining to Solomon, about who child it was and what to do with the child. So the one that was the mother of the child told Solomon, give it to her, because Solomon said, look, I know what I'd do. I would take a sword and I'd cut this child in half and give each one of you half of them. And that one that really loved that child was the real mother. So she told him, no, don't do it. You give it to her. Give it to her. So consequently, who was the real mother of the child came out, and Solomon gave the child to the real mother. That's how God works. God is powerful. There's powerful wisdom in using Solomon to discern who was the real mother of the child. Captive to the king. Jacob to Jesus. And Jacob begat Joseph, and Joseph the husband of Mary, in whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. The final three names in the genealogy seem like history, repeating itself, as they remind us of others who bore the names before. See Genesis 37.